All right, guys, how you doing? It's Rabea. I hope you're all well. So I just got back from a run of shows with Frog Leap, played Summer Breeze Festival, which was epic. There is a live stream of that gig if you want to check it out. It was an awesome gig, massive stage, like 20-something thousand people. So it was very exciting to do that. And it was great to see the guys. But I'm back for a little while before going out on tour again, and I wanted to shoot some more content for you all. In this video, I wanted to focus on heavy strat tones. Well, I say heavy strat tones, what I mean is heavy single coil tones. It's just, I can't help myself saying strat tones, it's just baked into my brain. But yeah, heavy single coil tones, the kind of tones that I'm using with the Totemist, the kind of tones you hear with guys like Biffy Clyro and, you know, Arcane Roots, and there's many other bands that use single coil pickups but create heavy tones. And everyone's got their own approach. I've got my own approach, and that's what I wanted to share with you in this video. How to create a single coil tone that's thick and girthy enough, it hasn't got a ton of twang to it, because I find that the twangy element of a single coil tone takes away a little bit from the overall heaviness of the sound, the aggression of the sound, all the rest of it. So in this video, I'm just going to go over the amp tone, some pedal choices or styles of pedals you can use to create these kind of sounds, on top of a couple of methods as well of blending pedals that will also help when it comes to creating a fat, you know, single coil heavy sound. It's also worth saying before we get started that it's a lot to do with what you choose to play. Now, if you're thinking I'm going to play like periphery riffs and djenty stuff, it's not necessarily going to work. It's more about the right kind of style of playing, whether it be fat bluesy riffs or, you know, like hard rock punky stuff. I'm really focusing less on the archetypal sound of heavy, when you might think metal and you might think djent and you might think, you know, prog metal world, and more about, does it sound heavy? Is it weighty? Is it aggressive? Is it angry? Is it the kind of sound that you would relate with heavier bands? So that's worth pointing out, because, you know, I don't want to, you know, miscommunicate the point I'm trying to make, which is more about getting the single coil pickups to sound really angry. Okay, to start with, you're going to need a guitar with single coils, whether it's like a T-type Tele or an S-type Strat or something that has single coil pickups. In my case, I'm using my Silverburst Cutlass. It's got my bare knuckle triptych set in, which again are, you know, medium voiced output pickups that can do the bluesy stuff, and they're a little bit more mid-forward than some pickups. But generally speaking, the methods that I'm going to talk about and the tones I'll dial in will generally work across the board when it comes to single coil pickups. So the first thing I want to talk about is amp tone. I'm using my Victory Kraken. The first gain stage is pretty much like a kind of Marshall JCM 900 kind of thing, as some of you may know by now. It's my go-to amplifier. And it's worth pointing out that all the EQ is set to halfway. The gain on gain 1 is set to halfway, just to give me a crunch. So I'm tuned to drop C. So, it's not very heavy at all. In fact, if I go to my neck pickup, it's not heavy. It's like, you know, it's got gain to it and it's got that bit of hair to it, but it's definitely not a heavy sound at all. But what we're trying to do here is blend pedals with the gain stage of the amp, and that's a really important point to make. If you use a clean tone, it's going to be harder to find those blended sounds that kind of create the heavy effect. When it's clean, it's less compressed at the gain stage of the amplifier. So if you're running like a Fender Twin, it might be a bit more difficult. And what I would do is get a pedal that can give you a light crunch and then throw pedals in front of that. In this instance, and most people will have something like, you know, a Marshall DSL or 5150 or a modeler that can do, you know, a light crunch. This is going to work with modelers as well. On top of things like, you know, katanas and modeling amplifiers and stuff like that. So all you need is a crunch, something that's crunchy. So now we've got our amp tone, I'm going to blend pedals with that amp tone. And you know, there are thousands and thousands of pedals out there. Everyone's got different pedals. So this isn't specific to the pedal, but the style of pedal you can find many of. You know, there are many tube screamers, many overdrive pedals, many fuzz pedals, and they all kind of do similar things to an extent. In this instance, the first pedal I want to talk about is a tube screamer type of pedal. Now I've got two different types of tube screamer on my board. I've got the Halcyon from Origin Effects, and I've got the Tempest Overdrive from Fortin, which is under the deck. Now they're both set the same, you know, low gain, high output, tones backed off a little bit because we're using single coils. Again, quite important. You want to back off the tone a little bit on these pedals. Now, I know some of you are going to go, oh, you know, the Halcyon, you know, it's a really expensive tube screamer, you know, or the Tempest is really expensive. That's not really the point. Tube screamer's a tube screamer, does the thing. In this situation, the Halcyon's set to a standard tube screamer, so irrespective of its price, it is doing what a tube screamer does. And as you can see on the pedal board, level is boosted, drive is right down, the dry level is up because that's what you'd get normally with a tube screamer, and the tone is backed off. The main purpose of doing this is to hit the front harder with a mid boost. So let me dial it in. There you go. So as you can hear, it's definitely boosted the amp, it's pushed the mids forward, it's more aggressive, but it's still fairly, it's got that twang to it. It's got a little bit too much spank for an aggressive tone. But it's important that we use something like a tube screamer because it's gonna boost the mids, it's gonna, you know, it's gonna give it more of an aggressive, faster, forward sound. I'm gonna take that off for a second. It's worth pointing out that the gig rig puts things in parallel. In this situation, when you don't have something like a switcher, I would put the tube screamer last in the chain. So after your fuzzes, after your overdrives, the last thing you want to lay on top of that tone to round out the sound. The next pedal I'm going to use is the Thunderclaw. Now the Thunderclaw is pretty much a kind of distortion pedal, but it's quite fuzzy. It works really well as a boost when you run the distortion low, but the more you turn that distortion up, it gets a bit fuzzy, and it's got a bass and a treble control. And I don't know if you can see quite clearly, but hopefully John can sort of crop in, but the bass is boosted right up and the treble is right down, the distortion's up and the output's up. So some of you might have already caught on here is that what we're doing is we're layering pedals by boosting the outputs of them. So they're always boosting the output into the next thing, back into the amp. So we're always hitting the amp harder and harder as we go. So let me show you what the Thunderclaw sounds like. Clearly you can hear that that's thickened it out a lot. And you still have that string definition. But one thing I would say is that it's kind of lost its chuggy edge. Like you can do it, but it's not quite so aggressive when you're digging in with the chugs. So that's where we blend back in with the tube screamer. So now with the tube screamer, we're hitting the front of the amp even harder because we're boosting the level. Hopefully you can hear what's happening there. Remember, when I'm using something like the Thunderclaw or an overdrive or anything that's, you know, gonna have a lot of gain to it, I want to back off the treble on it, and I want to use the level control and boost it a little bit more than halfway. And remember also, when you're using that tube screamer, you want to put that at the end. Always put it at the end, because as I said, you don't want to throw the tube screamer into a fuzz because it'll lose its effect. Really what you want to do is put it afterwards so that it layers that mid hump on top of the overall sound. And if you're able to tell there, it's got way more Mids, way more attack. I can chug with it. I can play chords. There's definition, and it just really works. I think that's a really nice heavy sound that you can use to play all sorts of riffs. Heavy, hard rock, you know. You can even play single string stuff and it just sounds really angry. I've used the Thunderclaw for many years, so I know how to dial it in, but it's really important to point out backing off the treble on both the pedals. If I put the treble at halfway on both, you might notice it's a little bit too intense. So if I back them back down, mainly the Thunderclaw, I could even get away with boosting the tone of the Tube Scream a little bit more. Because I'm miking this up and trying to get this through to YouTube. In the room, through the cab, you know, I could dial in more highs, and depending on where I'm stood, it's going to sound different to me. But because I'm trying to mic it up, I know that right in front of those cones, that's going to be a lot more high-end information than I'm hearing sat here. So that's another reason why I'm dialing it back. That's like your kind of distortion, verging on fuzz kind of tone. What if I was to use a traditional fuzz, like a tone bender? In this case, I've got the Bender 1973 from JHS. Now that is very much a fuzz pedal. So if I just dial out some stuff, go back to my original source, dial in the Bender. I'm just gonna put everything at halfway on the Bender. That's got a nice amount of mid information there anyway. Now, if I had that Bender fuzz or like even a Germanium fuzz works, like there are so many different fuzzes out there, so that surely you're gonna have one line around that works. It doesn't have to be fuzzy. You might wanna dial back the fuzz. I remember once shooting a video with Matt, Sound Like Philip Sace, I believe it was, and I had a fuzz face and a clon, and I had the fuzz dialed all the way back, and I hit it with the clon afterwards, and it created the thickest, most lovely single coil tone that I could use for heavy stuff. But in any case, got the Bender. It doesn't sound overly fuzzy right now. But I'm gonna hit it with the Tube Screamer. So by adding the Tube Screamer after the fuzz, it almost sort of tames the fuzz element in a way, and it gives it more of that girth, and you can attack with it, and it just sounds like an angry tone. Again, not necessarily associated with something like a single coil. Don't forget, this is the original sound. So I've boosted the fuzz now, so it should be more fuzzy, and then when we throw on the tube screamer, the Halcyon, let's see what happens. Here comes the Halcyon. So even with something like a vintage voiced fuzz, you can still throw a tube screamer on top of that and still get aggressive, angry single coil tones that you wouldn't necessarily associate with those pedals or with these kind of pickups. All of these for me would be usable in the band and most certainly when I'm doing recordings with single coil tones. In fact, both the Bender and the Thunderclaw are in my Archetype plugin. And so I've got really good experience with using those with the Kraken, because that's also in the Archetype plugin. And I can mess around and blend all those together and just get really cool, thick, angry single coil tones, which is what I've done, which I've put on the new Totemist EP. You know, it makes sense to use the Tempest as well. So let me just throw that up and check the settings of it. It's down here. So we want the drive low. Yeah, I'm taking off the high and the low pass so they're not engaged, and I'm running the level up, drive a little bit. Yeah. So here's another kind of overdrive in front of the amp. So you can clearly hear that's got a lot more high-end information in it than the Halcyon does, because all tube screamers are different, and I've taken out the high and the low pass filter so that we can focus in on dialing in a high end with something like the Thunderclaw again. So here's the Thunderclaw. I'm going to lay the Tempest with that. Again, it works. Let's try it with the Bender. So it's a little more intense with the Bender, but you get the same sort of effect. And actually the Tempest is more aggressive in the top end, so it actually pulls out those chugs a little bit more. So fuzzes or distortions or overdrives, I would say distortion and fuzz over overdrive because we're using that in the end. But any kind of gainy pedal that's got a nice amount of gain on tap, we want to use the tube screamer to shape it, much like we do in our heavy humbucker tones in front of a high gain amplifier. The tube screamer does a really good job of tightening things up and allowing us to get a little bit more aggression out the top. But we don't always necessarily put those with things like fuzzes or those kind of low definition, like low def, you know what I mean, like undefined kind of gain tones. The last pedal that I'm going to use to kind of demonstrate dialing in a heavy aggressive tone is the PDF 1X from Stone Deaf, because it's fantastic at giving us thick, high gain tones for single coils, but it's got this frequency dom on it that allows us to move up and down and create a really thick, heavy tone that we can sort of emphasize what the tube screamer does. So let me show you without it. Here's it with. And we're going to throw the Tempest on top. cool thing, as I said, I've made it really like under-defined using the PDF, so that the tempest can be added on top, and it gives you a little more string definition back. Hopefully that came across down the microphones. Now, the last thing that we can do to create heavier tones for single coils is use an octave. This is a tried and tested method. It really works, sounds fantastic when you use an octave with a bit of fuzz or overdrive with the tube screamer on top. So I'm gonna dial in pretty much the same tone we just had with the Thunderclaw, the Halcyon, and I'm gonna throw the octave on top. I really love playing with the octave on top because it just gives it so much more thickness and power. As much as I love it, I also just want to play heavy stuff without it, you know? So that's why I like using things like, as I said, overdrives or fuzzes with a tube screamer lying on top, because I think it does such a good job of that, and you don't have to rely on the octave all the time. So the last thing I'll show you is the ridiculously heavy tone, which is definitely harder to tame, and it's not really for riffs more as it is for single note power sounds, but it's where you use something like a lot of fuzz, an octave, and a tube screamer, and it's just wild. So here's without. So we've got the tube screamer in now. Throw on the fuzz. Again, it's lots of fun, but I wouldn't necessarily say it was the focus of this video tone-wise. So just to recap, we start with a crunch on the amp. We use something like a tube screamer, we back off the tone a bit. We put the tube screamer last in the chain of pedals that we want to be creating this sound with. And then we use something like a distortion, just back off the tone, maybe back off some of the distortion itself and boost the level, and then you get fatness. Hopefully that was helpful, hopefully it was insightful, and it gives you guys even some idea of how to approach dialing in a heavy single coil tone. Again, doesn't really matter what amp you're using as long as you're using a crunch stage of your amplifier, and it really doesn't matter what pedals you've got as long as they've got an element of fuzz or distortion or gain, and you've got control of the EQ, and you've got a tube screamer. That would pretty much sum up how to do it. Other than that, it's all just a case of tone chasing, dialing in, and finding out where you're going to end up at the end of it. Thank you for watching this video. Let me know what you think in the comment section below. Let me know if there's any other types of tones you'd like me to try show you guys how to dial in. If you're interested in any of these pedals specifically, I'll put them in the description box below. Check out my music, links in the description box. I've got merch now, of course, with Sleepless apparel. And yeah, thanks for watching this video. Like, subscribe, and share. I've been Rabea, and I will see you all very soon.